In the universe of The Sopranos, power is rarely absolute. It flows unevenly, hidden in corners, whispered in hallways, and earned as much through patience and survival as through brutality. Every character occupies a rung on an invisible ladder, a hierarchy shaped by skill, temperament, and circumstance. To understand the structure of mob society, one must first examine the men who exist at its base, those whose power is limited, but who nevertheless define the functional stability of the system. Beansy Gaeta is a man of this class. Introduced as a minor earner, with a history of pizza shops and envelope collections, Beansy is, on the surface, unremarkable. He does not lead, he does not plan, he does not dominate, and yet the simplicity of his role belies its difficulty. Survival in a world dominated by ambition and violence is itself a form of power. Beansy's life is a testament to adaptation. Early in the series, he is a small-time earner who has experienced both the benefits and dangers of proximity to higher power. Unlike soldiers or enforcers who operate with aggression, Beansy operates with discretion. He is careful, deliberate, and calculated in his actions. When Richie confronts him violently, driving a car into him and leaving him paralyzed, the incident exposes the fragility of his world. The attack is not merely physical, it is symbolic, a brutal lesson in the limits of minor influence. Here is a man who has been loyal, who has kept his head down, and yet he is subject to the whims of those above him. And yet, Beansy endures. His survival after such a traumatic event is emblematic of his level of power. Real-world mob dynamics often mirror this reality. Associates, those who are not formally made, but are essential to the family's operations, often walk a tightrope between utility and disposability. Their strength comes not from dominance, but from resilience and adaptability. Beansy embodies this principle. His response to violence is measured. His rebuilding of life in Florida exemplifies strategic patience. In essence, he survives by recognizing his limits and maximizing the minimal influence he possesses. Moreover, Beansy's character explores a subtle psychological dimension of low-tier power. Unlike Feach or Tony Blundetto, he is not haunted by ambition or nostalgia. He accepts the boundaries of his world, which paradoxically grants him a type of freedom absent in more ambitious men. This suggests that in mob society, influence is not simply linear. Those at the base, if intelligent and adaptable, can exist with a form of quiet autonomy, protected by the fact that they are underestimated. Beansy's influence, then, is a study in pragmatism. He is the baseline, the man who maintains the rhythm of the system without ever dictating its terms. He survives because he understands that the hierarchy is not meant to elevate him, and he positions himself in a way that ensures continuity of life over continuity of power. His survival is also moral, in a sense. He navigates the violent world without losing his capacity for empathy, a trait that distinguishes him from more violent figures and allows him to build trust and enduring connections, albeit on a small scale. This baseline level of power, modest constrained, but stable, sets the stage for understanding the subsequent tiers. While Beansy survives, those above him, such as Feach LaManna, chase shadows of past authority. The contrast between the two illuminates the dynamics of adaptation versus nostalgia, resilience versus pride. Beansy's quiet endurance foreshadows the peril awaiting those who cannot navigate these same waters. Where Beansy embodies adaptive survival, Feach LaManna represents the dangers of living in a past that no longer exists. He is the archetype of the old-school gangster, a man whose respect was earned in a world dominated by physical intimidation and rigid codes of honor. Feach has spent decades within the system, a veteran of its wars and prisons, and he carries the confidence of experience. Yet, when he returns after a long stretch in prison, it becomes immediately apparent that the world he left is no longer waiting for him. Feach's level of influence is more nuanced than Beansy's, because it carries historical weight. He is a man of past significance, respected, feared, and remembered, but his power is eroding. His authority comes not from current operational capability, but from reputation and the memory of deeds long ago. In Mafia terms, he occupies the position of a veteran with residual clout, a man whose voice carries, but whose hands no longer shape the present. This disparity creates tension. Feach refuses to acknowledge the shift in the organization's norms. He believes control is enforced through fear, intimidation, and overt displays of strength. He cannot comprehend the subtler mechanisms now in play: strategic alliances, financial leverage, and quiet diplomacy. His clashes with modernized operators underscore the psychological rigidity that defines him. Feach is trapped by his own pride, unable to adjust his conception of authority to a world that rewards adaptability over tradition. Psychologically, Feach embodies a potent combination of nostalgia and hubris. He is convinced that his past deeds entitle him to present respect, and this sense of entitlement drives his behavior. He attempts to reclaim territory, assert dominance, and challenge men who are younger, more patient, and better attuned to the evolving hierarchy. In doing so, he underestimates the dynamics of contemporary power and overestimates the weight of his reputation. Historically, organized crime is littered with men like Feach. Veterans returning from long prison terms often misjudge the evolution of their world. The Mafia rewards memory and continuity only when coupled with practical relevance. Those who cling to outdated methods, while respected for their past, are frequently marginalized or eliminated. Feach's eventual arrest is emblematic of this truth. His influence is powerful in memory but fleeting in reality. In contrast to Beansy, Feach demonstrates how the allure of past authority can blind a man to survival. While Beansy adapts, Feach clings to the skeleton of an old world, mistaking nostalgia for strategy. He is at level 2, higher in formal prestige than Beansy, but fundamentally constrained by his inability to evolve. His story is a cautionary study in how pride can become a liability and how the appearance of power does not guarantee continued relevance. Feach's presence in the hierarchy also highlights the interplay between individual psychology and systemic change. He represents the psychological trap that the Mafia's veterans face: the tension between self-perception as a powerful figure and the reality of reduced agency. Unlike Beansy, who operates pragmatically within his limits, Feach pursues recognition that no longer exists, revealing the fragility inherent in power that is purely retrospective. Tony Blundetto occupies a transitional tier between survival and authority, ambition and destruction. Unlike Beansy, who survives through adaptation, and Feach, who fails through nostalgia, Blundetto's life is defined by the tension between potential and self-sabotage. He is intelligent, capable, and historically credible, yet he is repeatedly undone by circumstance, impulse, and the very structure of loyalty that has preserved men like Beansy. Blundetto's influence derives from both legacy and skill. He is related to the Soprano family by blood, and his past as a soldier gives him operational credibility. He is capable of strategy and calculation, yet he is emotionally volatile, prone to impulsive decisions that sabotage his otherwise promising career. The paradox of Tony Blundetto is that he understands the rules of power better than most, but is unable to navigate them consistently. Psychologically, he embodies the tragedy of the gifted but doomed archetype. Blundetto wants to live differently, to operate outside the Mafia's destructive orbit, but his internalized notions of loyalty, honor, and personal validation continually pull him back. When he murders Billy Leotardo, it is both a personal vendetta and a systemic violation, a moment where private emotion overrides structural awareness. This act propels him into a zone where influence is absolute but fragile, governed by both fear and inevitability. In real-world mob hierarchies, Blundetto mirrors figures who oscillate between legitimate enterprise and organized crime. Smart, capable men with connections and skill often overreach, allowing personal pride or vengeance to dictate decisions. Their fall is rarely due to incompetence, but to emotional decision-making that the Mafia cannot accommodate. Blundetto's trajectory is emblematic of the dangers inherent in this middle tier: sufficient power to act, insufficient detachment to survive. His story underscores the central paradox of mid-tier power. Opportunity exists, but only when ambition is tempered by discipline. Blundetto's failure is as instructive as Beansy's survival or Feach's decline. He demonstrates how potential can amplify both success and destruction, revealing that influence is not just about skill, but about psychological equilibrium. Furthermore, Blundetto occupies a liminal space between the old and new orders. Like Feach, he has historical credibility, but unlike Feach, he is conscious of contemporary dynamics. Yet he cannot reconcile his internal contradictions with the external demands of the system. This duality makes him compelling. He is both victim and agent, both survivor and casualty. His narrative illustrates that in a hierarchy, like the Mafia's, Power is rarely absolute. Even those capable of commanding respect are ultimately bound by the constraints of circumstance, history, and personal psychology. Blundetto's influence is therefore complex. He represents the potential for ascent, the danger of misalignment, and the human vulnerability embedded within structured power. At level 3, he occupies the transitional rung between survival and authority, between prudence and impulse. He is a cautionary tale for the ambitious. Intellect and capability can elevate, but internal inconsistency and emotional volatility can destroy. The contrast between the first 3 levels is instructive. Beansy survives by humility and adaptation. Feach fails through pride and nostalgia. Tony Blundetto, by contrast, inhabits the middle ground where knowledge, ability, and potential coexist with fatal flaws. These 3 men collectively define the foundation of the Mafia hierarchy, illustrating the interplay between personal psychology and systemic rules, and setting the stage for understanding higher tiers of influence. Mikey Palmisi occupies the 4th level, a midpoint where influence is substantial but conditional. Mikey commands soldiers, executes plans, and engages in operational control. Yet unlike the men above him, his authority is delegated, not inherent. Mikey is the quintessential enforcer, a soldier whose power derives entirely from the patronage of his boss, Junior Soprano. Mikey's significance lies in his ability to operationalize violence. In the Mafia, execution is as crucial as planning. Mikey moves bodies, coordinates hits, and enforces the will of the higher-ups. He is efficient, disciplined, and feared, but only because he channels the authority of others. His influence is real, but fragile. It exists in the gap between command and execution, dependent on the strength of those he serves. Psychologically, Mikey is fascinating. He embodies loyalty without ambition. Unlike Blundetto, who is caught between desire and restraint, Mikey is content to be the instrument of power rather than its source. This obedience makes him effective, but also leaves him exposed. In the Mafia, proximity to authority is dangerous. The closer a man is to the head, the higher the risk. Mikey's death underscores this reality. His operational importance ensures he is highly visible, making him vulnerable when political tides shift. Real-world parallels are clear. Mafia families historically rely on reliable, loyal soldiers. Their operational competence maintains the family structure, but their personal safety is contingent. Mikey's story illustrates a central tension in organized crime. Power can be borrowed, but borrowed power is always provisional. Mikey's narrative also demonstrates the limits of influence without autonomy. He can command men and orchestrate action, but he cannot negotiate alliances, broker deals, or challenge leadership without risking death. Level 4, therefore, is defined by operational control without sovereignty. Mikey is influential, yet impermanent, an essential component of the system, but not its architect. He represents a ceiling for men whose talents are instrumental rather than strategic. Mikey Palmisi is also a cautionary study in psychological identity. His entire self-worth is intertwined with his role. Unlike Beansy, who survives because he maintains autonomy, or Feach, who fails by clinging to history, Mikey's identity is inseparable from the chain of command. This fusion of self and duty magnifies the consequences of failure. To fall in the mob is not merely to die, but to vanish from the only existence that defines you. Ascending the ladder, Little Carmine represents a different form of power, influence through inheritance, diplomacy, and strategic disengagement. Unlike Mikey, whose authority is operational, Little Carmine's is political. He is insulated by family legacy, privileged by the respect accorded to his father, Carmine Sr., and defined by an ability to navigate the complex social and business dynamics of organized crime. Carmine's strength lies in his intelligence, patience, and understanding of social equilibrium. He does not assert dominance through violence. He asserts it through presence, negotiation, and perception. The world he inhabits rewards these qualities differently than the streets reward aggression, where Mikey's power is active and kinetic. Carmine's is cerebral, reactive, and preventative. Yet Little Carmine also demonstrates the limitations of inherited influence. His reluctance to assert authority decisively marks him as ineffective in moments of crisis. Power in the Mafia is a currency that demands expenditure. Indecision, even when principled, can be interpreted as weakness. Carmine's disengagement, a reflection of his aversion to violence and preference for comfort, renders him vulnerable to more ruthless actors, such as Phil Leotardo, whose worldview is grounded in domination. Psychologically, Carmine embodies a paradox. He is confident and intelligent, but lacks the ruthless drive that defines top-tier authority in the mob. He survives and retains influence precisely because he is selective in engagement. Yet this selectivity limits his capacity to seize the pinnacle of power. He is a man of privilege navigating a system built on both brutality and ambition. Historical parallels exist in the real mafia. Sons of powerful bosses often inherit social capital and networks, but must prove their capacity for command. Many succeed by cultivating diplomacy and strategic alliances. Others fail by over-reliance on legacy. Little Carmine illustrates the subtle distinction between inherited respect and earned authority. Level 5, therefore, represents political influence, soft power, survival through negotiation, and the strategic avoidance of unnecessary violence. Carmine's role highlights the psychological dimensions of power at higher tiers. Unlike Mikey, he can disengage from operational duties and focus on systemic management. Unlike Phil, he prioritizes stability over domination. This approach demonstrates that in certain contexts, influence can be exercised without bloodshed, but it also reveals that ultimate authority demands decisiveness and the willingness to impose one's will, qualities Carmine struggles to consistently display. Phil Leotardo occupies level 6, the threshold of ultimate authority, defined by fear, pride, and uncompromising control. Where Carmine represents political influence, tempered by caution, Phil exemplifies domination enforced through intimidation. His worldview is uncompromising, respect must be commanded, tradition restored, and loyalty maintained under threat of violence. Phil's power is absolute within his operational sphere, but it is built on a dangerous foundation. Authority based primarily on fear is brittle. While compliance is immediate, loyalty is conditional and contingent on the perpetuation of threat. Phil understands the mechanisms of respect and leverage, yet he underestimates the volatility of a system increasingly shaped by negotiation, pragmatism, and patience. Psychologically, Phil is a study in obsession and rigidity. His world is binary: dominance or humiliation, tradition or collapse. He clings to a moral and structural order that existed in his youth, believing the mob's decay is reversible through brutality. Every action, from murders to punitive measures, is intended to restore an idealized past. His focus on revenge against Tony Blundetto and his antagonism toward Little Carmine illustrate a worldview that equates authority with fear, not consensus. Historically, figures like Phil exist throughout Mafia lore. Leaders who rely on terror often experience immediate compliance, but sow the seeds of rebellion. John Gotti's rise and fall, for instance, mirrors this dynamic. Charisma and violence secure authority, but also expose vulnerability. Phil's narrative echoes this pattern. He achieves substantial control, but is ultimately overreached by his own inflexibility. Level 6, therefore, embodies the apex of dangerous power, influential, feared, and capable, yet susceptible to the very system it seeks to dominate. Phil's tyranny demonstrates the destructive potential of absolute authority when it is exercised without strategic foresight. Unlike Mikey or Carmine, Phil's approach prioritizes spectacle and immediacy, leaving the long-term stability of his influence at risk. Phil's trajectory also highlights the interplay between psychology and structural power. Fear amplifies obedience but isolates the tyrant. His insistence on enforcing his vision alienates allies and galvanizes adversaries. In this sense, level 6 is both apex and precipice, the point at which influence is maximal, yet survival is uncertain, and where ambition, unchecked by empathy or pragmatism, carries profound consequences. Finally, Jackie Senior occupies level 7, the summit of the hierarchy, a man whose influence blends respect, authority, and strategic vision. Unlike Phil, whose power is brittle and enforced through fear, Jackie's authority is stabilized through competence, consistency, and a deep understanding of both human nature and organizational dynamics. Jackie's significance lies not in his violence or notoriety, but in his ability to integrate authority with legitimacy. He commands respect not because of terror, but because of fairness, foresight, and reliability. In the Mafia, where volatility is constant, the value of predictability cannot be overstated. Jackie's decisions create order without requiring constant enforcement, a distinction that separates him from the men below him. Psychologically, Jackie embodies balance. He is neither ambitious to the point of recklessness, like Blundetto, nor rigidly traditional. Like Phil, he understands the social and operational dynamics of the organization, exercising power strategically and empathetically. This equilibrium enables him to maintain authority while minimizing internal dissent. Historically, Jackie represents a class of mafia leaders whose longevity derives from wisdom rather than brutality. Transitional bosses in real-world crime, families often occupy this role. Men who preserve institutional memory, maintain alliances, and mediate conflicts. Jackie's success lies in his ability to stabilize the system while retaining operational flexibility. Level 7 is therefore the apex, not because of force, but because of integration. Jackie exemplifies the ideal synthesis of influence, respect, and strategic vision. Unlike Mikey, he commands without dependence. Unlike Carmine, he acts decisively when required. Unlike Phil, he balances authority with foresight. His death leaves a vacuum not easily filled, demonstrating that the true apex of mafia power is both rare and fragile, defined as much by character as by structural control. Jackie's legacy highlights a central theme. Ultimate authority in the mafia is less about aggression and more about equilibrium. Power exercised without vision or restraint leads to collapse. The men below him, whether operational, political, or tyrannical, illustrate variations of influence constrained by psychology, circumstance, and temperament. Jackie's mastery of these variables makes him the standard by which all other levels are measured. Finally, Jackie Senior occupies level 7, the summit of the hierarchy, a man whose influence blends respect, authority, and strategic vision. Unlike Phil, whose power is brittle and enforced through fear, Jackie's authority is stabilized through competence, consistency, and a deep understanding of both human nature and organizational dynamics.